That year really shook me because it started with the divorce, which undermined my confidence as a woman, and then finished with the attack. I had to decide whether to just walk away from wine writing, become bitter, and my wine drinking was getting out of control because I was using it to cope, or if I was going to pull myself together, especially for my son, who was only 14 at the time, my career, my health, my self worth. I do think there's going to be more stories like this coming to light. I am writing my story now as a memoir that's about that time. I really do hope it will be a book that can help women, but also men or anyone who's ever felt completely misunderstood or just lost in life and things have escalated beyond their control and they just ache for compassion and understanding.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Mclean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 148. What are the latest trends in wine? From blue wines to raw wines? And should you be drinking them or running in the opposite direction? Why is high-tech and wine a perfect pairing? What's it like to go behind the scenes of wine writing industry? And how do you recover from devastating professional and personal attacks? And I'm speaking from my own experience on this one. You'll get those answers and more wine tips in my chat with the wonderful Elizabeth Schneider, host of the Wine for Normal People podcast. She's interviewing me this time. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, links to both of my books, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/148. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, last Friday, Miles and I drove up to Prince Edward County for a glorious weekend. The sun was out as we walked the long sandy beach at Sandbanks Provincial Park, and as a maritime gal, I find the water so calming. We enjoyed some of the best meals we've had in a long time, especially at Bloom and Bistro. Their backyard garden is spectacular. Flame and Smith, famous for their dry-aged steaks and fiery grilling pit. And for lunch, Bantam. You must try the curried chicken. I was determined not to visit wineries as that's work for me. No pity, I know. But after we enjoyed a bottle of Long Dog Pinot Noir at Bloom and we couldn't resist, I bought a case. Oh, and by the way, we stayed at the Manse, which is this lovely old gray building that used to be the rectory for the priest who lived there. It's right beside a church, kind of just in downtown Picton, but they've renovated it completely. It's beautiful. The rooms are gorgeous. Anyway, just another recommendation if you go. It felt so good to get away, even if it was only a 3-hour drive from home. A change of scenery felt really healing. Do you feel that way too about travel? Let me know. Okay, on with the show.
Natalie Mclean is an accredited sommelier who operates one of the largest wine sites on the web at www.nataliemclean.com. Her first book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, a wine-soaked journey from grape to glass, and her second book, Unquenchable, a tipsy quest for the world's best bargain wines, were both selected as one of Amazon's best books of the year. She is the wine expert on CTV's The Social, Canada's largest daytime television show, CTV News, Global Television's morning show. She was named the world's best drinks writer at the World Food Media Awards and has won 4 James Beard Foundation Journalism Awards. Natalie is an author, an online wine course instructor, and wine reviewer. She is a member of the National Capital Sommelier Guild, the Wine Writers Circle, and several French wine societies with complicated and impressive names that I can't say, since I always say I really don't speak French. Natalie has an MBA. She's a fellow podcast host. Her excellent podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, has been cited as such a great podcast. And I have also been on her show. Welcome, Natalie.
Hey, Elizabeth, it's so great to be here with you.
You are so accomplished. It's ridiculous. It's so good to have you on. I feel like a schmo next to you. All right.
No, my dear, your podcast rocks. The top of every list.
Stop.
Absolutely.
All right. Tell us about your life, how you got into wine.
Mm-hmm.
Were you born into a wine family? I'm guessing. I'm guessing no, but you tell us.
Yeah, exactly. So I grew up in a small Nova Scotia town, and it was beer and whiskey on the table because we were Scottish. So wine was for fancy people, and we were not fancy at all. Well, I guess there was one box of wine at Easter, and the same would be saved for Christmas the next year. So there was a little bit of wine, but it was pretty scary stuff. So it wasn't until my late 20s that I started drinking wine after I finished the MBA, like you. And what happened is I never learned to cook. I was child of a single mom. She was a school teacher. She just didn't get into cooking. So it was hot dogs and so on. So anyway, no cooking skills. My husband and I met him in the MBA. We would go out for dinner a lot now that we had some money. And that was the first time I tasted a good wine. It was a Brunello. It was in an Italian restaurant. I thought he was offering us a pasta dish. I didn't know what the heck Brunello meant. But I thought, sure. And he offered it to us in tumblers and no sniffing, no ceremony. And I just remember lifting that glass to my nose and thinking, holy smokes, what's this? And then I drank it, even better. And I loved it. And I wanted more of it, but I also wanted to know how to talk about it so that I could get more of it. And, the last, 23 years has been a search for those words.
It's amazing. Well, you have definitely found the words since you decided to write books about wine. What's the progression in wine? So here you are, you're an MBA. You were working in tech, right? I mean, you and I are like two sides of the same coin. I also grew up with a single mother, although she did cook. She actually had a catering company, so for a little while. But she never taught us how to cook because she cooked. So she was like, forget it. You don't need to know how to cook. So you got the MBA, but you were in tech, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I worked for a high-tech company that was based in Mountain View, California. It's actually now the campus of Google. And so I was getting into this love of wine, and I started arranging all of my meetings on Thursdays or Fridays so I could drive up to Napa and Sonoma to visit wineries. Other side activities never stuck. It was type A personality. So golf was just, don't give me an iron club. And learning Spanish at night was exhausting, but I could drink Spanish wine. So anyway, I started through those visits, weekend stayovers and driving up to wine country. And then eventually I took a sommelier course just for fun at night. But I never had any confidence, Elizabeth, that I could actually get paid to write. And that's why I didn't go to journalism school. My single mom drilled into me, be financially independent. So that's what I did. And I had no notion about writing about wine until I was on maternity leave and very, very sleep deprived state. All of that made sense to me. I had finished the sommelier program, it was a diploma program. And I thought, wow, I could write about wine on the web. That was actually news and a story back when I started writing in the Paleolithic era. So
it's happened very fast. Let's face it. When we think about how quickly all of this has evolved and the fact that period of time when you started, blogs were the thing. I started with a blog also.
Oh, yeah. That was a big deal. I think, too, we both may have been influenced coming from a high-tech background. We weren't afraid of the technology, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And you could see just how much these two things fit together, even though it didn't seem like they could, wine and tech. But I think it's an amazing intersection. So, yeah, I started a website early. I got into writing, and I just didn't go back to tech. I was hooked.
Did you quit after you had your son?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Canada, we're very lucky to have long maternity leaves, but also the high-tech company I worked for gave you 6 paid weeks every 4 years. And I hadn't taken, of course, any vacation because, work, 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 work. And so I had a full year off. And so I had the
Wow.
time. I know, what a luxury.
Yeah,
I had the
right?
time to explore this without the financial pressure. And so by the end of the year, I thought, this is what I'm doing.
That is so awesome. You started with the website, but then how did the book
Mm.
come about?
Well, it wasn't even my idea to write a book. After I won a James Beard Award, this editor from Penguin reached out to me, which seems like a dream now. It doesn't really happen that way usually. But she said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I thought, no, but maybe. And so I kind of asked one of my editors at a magazine, "What do I do?" And she said, "Get an agent. Don't start there. Back up, get an agent." So I did. And then we trotted around to all the publishing houses, and it went from there. I got a book deal, but it was still a struggle. I had to learn how to write for a book with a narrative, book length narrative arc versus just sewing together magazine articles. So again, we share that experience, Elizabeth. So it was a learning.
Mine was a bit circuitous in that I had the podcast and no one listened to podcasts, until like last year. So,
Yeah, well, you were an innovator. You were a
I've been
pioneer.
doing this. Well, again, to your point, it's about the tech thing. I mean, in 2011, I was working with Rick from Hello Vino. I was writing copy for his site because he needed an expert. And I had just quit my job at the huge hulking winery and I needed money. I kind of didn't want to do consulting stuff. I wanted to do consumer stuff because he was so all in on tech. He was like, "Why don't we start a podcast together?" I was like, "What the hell is that?" And then that was in 2011. So I was just
Wow.
lucky that came about. And then for the longest time, I just remember my dad being like, "You're never going to do anything with this. Nothing's ever going to come of this. What are you doing with your life?" And then actually my agent approached me because she was a podcast listener. So it is sort of similar.
Oh, that's great.
The blog was not my true passion. It was much
Okay.
more about talky. Like, that's how I
Right.
am.
Oh,
I'm just
you
a
were
gabber.
good at it. You're a professional gabber. You're a great gabber. And you got in there early, which is so fundamental. Now everyone's on the bandwagon, but I just find podcasting such an intimate medium, being millimeters away from somebody's brain, that whole voice thing. And as you know, I'm sure, podcast listeners, they're in it for the long haul. They listen to the whole thing versus Facebook video. You're lucky if you get 30 seconds of engagement with somebody.
Social media is really difficult for
Mm.
people like us because I think we're so interested in the content,
Mm-hmm.
but there's all this segmentation of like, who's going to seek out a wine podcast? It's going to be somebody who wants to learn. So already it's kind of like this awesome audience. And
Mhm.
I know that sometimes when people listen to my show, I'm not for them. I'm very different for the wine world, as are you. And
Mhm.
so I may just be like, wow, that is not anything I want in wine. I want something really serious. That's totally fine. However, I think social media is more difficult for me, at least, because I'm like, that's not enough time for me to do what I
Sure.
want to tell you. So let me ask you this. How did you get into teaching wine? You first did all of the writing, right? And then you
That's
did
right.
the teaching.
Exactly. So I've been teaching wine courses online, just online. I don't do them in person ever. But it was like coming full circle, coming home in a way, teaching, because I taught Highland dancing for years. I mean, I started in my basement as a 13-year-old. And
No way.
yeah. I took little notices around to the principals of the elementary school. And then the first kid who won a trophy of mine, I photocopied her picture and the story, and I didn't even know what the heck I was doing, but it was my first customer testimonial.
That's so awesome.
It was so fun. And then by the time I finished, just before I went away to the MBA program, I had 300 students and 3 teachers
Oh my
and different
gosh.
locations. Yeah. But again, I didn't have the business savvy. I didn't sell the business. I just put them all with a teacher I thought who would be good for them. So they were taken care of, but it was just so naive. But anyway.
Not really, though, because and it's amazing. You're such a born entrepreneur. I wish I had that. I was always like, oh, should I do the lemonade stand? No, nobody's going to buy it. That's like my thing. I'm like the consummate no, I don't think so. And then I just kind of do it. And then somebody finds it and they're like, that's really good. You should do that. And I'm like, no, I don't know. I'm the self loathing Jew. No,
Oh,
it's not good enough. It's so funny.
well,
Um,
then I'm the paranoid driven Catholic. So, like, it's like, oh my God, you're one job away from eating cat food. Go, 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 go. It's like, oh, please, someone help me relax. Anyway, maybe that's how we both came to wine.
I seriously, before you did the online teaching, your main business was reviewing wine and writing about wine, correct?
Exactly.
That was your core. Out of all of the stuff that you do you like writing more? Do you like podcasting more? Do you like teaching more? What's your thing that if you could do nothing else but that you would do?
Well, this may be a cheat of an answer, but I love storytelling. And so that piece will intersect with the writing, the podcasting, and the teaching, because I think storytelling is what we're wired for. It's what I love. It's kind of how my own mom taught me. And I just think, like with my books, I try to tell stories because if I give you 17 steps for proper wine service, yes, you might remember some of them. Maybe you forget all of them. But if I tell you the night I worked at a five diamond restaurant as a sommelier in training, nervous, and someone orders an expensive Bordeaux and I drip wine on the white tablecloth and all this other stuff, but still put the learning in there, the steps and what is good wine service. It's like what my mom used to do. She used to put the peas in the mashed potatoes. So it's kind of hide the vegetables. So I'm trying to hide the vegetables still with the way I approach wine, teaching about it and writing about it. So it's a storytelling.
I definitely see that. It's so funny. I think I'm more on the psychological side of things. I
What
really
do you mean
like
by
to
that?
know the reason I do this is because I'm a real researcher and I love to dig into the why behind things.
Yep.
So it's less about the story for me and more about the what's behind that. I should have been a psychologist. I really love digging into that. What is making that tick? Why
Mm.
is Bordeaux the way that it is? Why is South Africa having the issues it's having? What's underneath that? So to me, it's like, okay, and then I go really down that rabbit hole. Like, I'm like, okay, well, what's the politics of it? What's the culture there? That's my cross section. My
Mm.
cross section is that what makes things tick. I don't know. I'm such a weird person in that way.
No, but
Just 'cause
that's why
it's like,
you have so many followers and subscribers or listeners to your podcast. There are lots of people like that. I'm one of them. I just love your approach.
well, thank you. And I love yours too. They're very complimentary. I want to talk about this is the hard question because we talked about this and I know it's not anything you've really ever talked about. And this is not like I don't want this to be a huge deal. But in 2012, you had an issue with some copyright infringement stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very difficult period for a number of reasons. Give us the brief overview because it still hangs around and I think you should clear the air. How did you weather the storm? Because the backstory behind this, there's more to it. And you survived this. And I just give a little bit here.
So you're right, Elizabeth. This is the first time I've talked about this issue publicly. And thank you for inviting me to do that, even though I'm terrified. So 2012 was the absolute worst vintage of my life. The year started with my husband of 20 years asking for a divorce and a custody battle over my young son. And then it ended with this confusion over copyright. So back up a little bit. One day I was just going through my email and I got this Google alert. And I clicked it open and it was for one of my wine reviews. And I clicked through the link and it took me to another wine website. And I thought, that's weird because I had told the man who ran the site I didn't want to be part of his site. And yet there was my review. So I just sort of surfed around a little bit. And I noticed that on his site and another website, they were republishing the wine reviews from our provincial liquor store monopoly here in Ontario.
Right. LCBO.
Exactly.
Anybody can look at that stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, I'm a glass half full kind of gal. So I didn't ask them to remove my reviews from their site. Instead, I started republishing the reviews from the LCBO site on my site. I assume they must be in the public domain if all of these sites are doing it. They must have purchased them or something. I don't know. They must qualify for fair use because they're fairly small bits of information. And all of these sites have been doing it for years. But I was wrong, dead wrong about that. And eventually I removed the reviews from my website. But in the meantime, the issue really escalated online and it went far beyond my wine reviews to a pretty vicious attack on my character and my body, from my hair, my breasts,
Oh my gosh.
to what certain men wanted to do to me in intimate detail, several of whom were male wine writers, to a rape threat if I didn't shut up.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You didn't tell me that part. Look, here's the
No.
thing. The other end of this is two things that I want to say. One is that a lot of this stuff comes to roost because we as solopreneurs sometimes don't understand the full copyright stuff. There's all these people now coming after people for pictures and stuff like
Mhm.
that. I told you, I shared this with you. I've had people try to come after me and then you take it down and they're still coming after you. And it's very confusing. I actually have a contact at the USPTO office, the US Patent and Trademark Office. I've talked to him about this because there's no guidelines for us. We don't know. And the other thing that you didn't mention, but you mentioned to me, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning it, is that these other sites did not get the same attention, even though they were doing the same thing you were doing. And it really was a very singled out thing because you were both more popular and perhaps because they felt they could intimidate you for whatever reason, whether it be a chauvinistic reason or whatever. And I think that really sucks. I think that you were trying the best that you could. And the fact that the wine industry came after you in that way, sad, not surprising.
Yeah,
Are
well,
you surprised? I mean, really, are you surprised by it? Like in retrospect, it's disgusting, but let's face it, look at the Court of Master Sommeliers and everything that happened, right?
But this is 10 years ago, Elizabeth. This was 2012. There was a whole confluence of things. It was the heyday of aggregators like the Huffington Post.
Right.
People were confused over copyright. But it's only 10 years later now that those stories are coming to light, with the New York Times expose about the Court of Master Sommeliers, where they all had to resign for sexual harassment and so on.
I think it's all tied in to this bit of toxicity. Thank you for sharing that. It is
Absolutely.
a horrible story, but one that I wish you had talked about it earlier because I feel like people don't know. They don't know what you went through. But all right, let's
No
talk
one ever
about—
sees, but I'll just add a couple more things,
Please.
Elizabeth, just to finish this off, because I appreciate the opportunity. I guess that year in particular really shook me because it started with the divorce, which really kind of, I felt, undermined my confidence as a woman, and then finished with the attack. I had to decide whether to just walk away from wine writing, become bitter, and my wine drinking was getting out of control because I was using it to cope, or if I was going to pull myself together, especially for my son, who was only 14 at the time, my career, my health, my self-worth. And so I do think there's going to be more stories like this coming to light. And I am writing my story now as a memoir that's about that time. I really do hope it will be a book that can help women, but also men or anyone who's ever felt, completely misunderstood or just lost in life and things have escalated beyond their control. And they just ache for just compassion and understanding. Sometimes there's not enough of that.
No, I agree with you. And I think when you're in the public eye, it's one thing when you've got people in private maligning you, but then when you're in public and then you don't know what to do, do you come forward and tell what's going on or do you not? And I think it's really hard. So I do appreciate you talking about this, but I do want to say you're incredible because you picked it up and you stayed in wine and the world needs your voice and they need your positivity. This industry can really wear you down, whether you're a man or a woman, by the way. I mean, it can wear you down, especially if you're of a certain personality type where, I feel it every day. I feel like you're not good enough and you're not, as I was saying before, I'm this like the self-loathing Jew. I'm like, what am I doing? And there's plenty of people to, send me emails with like, oh, you're not doing this. You're not as good as this. You're not. I'm just trying to stay in my lane, man. Like, I'm
Yeah,
just trying,
exactly.
there's not a whole lot of us doing what we're doing. And I do it for the passion and I do it for the listeners, like you do it for your readers and your listeners too. And so I just applaud you for sticking with it because you're so talented and you have other
Thank you.
things to do. I mean, who among us, especially again on the entrepreneur business side, hasn't been like, what else would I do? Like, if this doesn't work out, what else am I going to do? Can I go back to tech? Am I like out of that? You
Ugh,
know what I mean? Like, who hasn't
yeah.
thought about that before?
Oh,
You
that
know?
terrified me too, because it was like 15 years since I'd left corporate life. It's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to support my son? My career has just been canceled. So anyway.
Yeah, but you're back and you stuck with it and you did what you did best. So let's move on past that. Thank you for talking about that.
Sure.
And let's talk about Canada because we
Mm.
have so many listeners in Canada. Canada is really a special place. And what are the differences, do you think, between the Canadian wine drinker and American wine drinkers? And what's the fundamental difference besides the fact that Canadians are way nicer and funnier? Like the best sense of humor.
And Americans are so flattering. So, I think we might be more similar than different in palates. I think because neither Canada nor America had the traditional wine growing culture like Europe had. So we grew up, I think, as countries, as beer and whiskey nations. So that affects, I think, the kind of palate you develop. I do think that often wine drinkers' palates develop alongside wine culture and wine growing regions. And so, if anything, but I'm going to generalize grossly here, because we are a cooler climate in many places along Canada, if that has affected our palates, it would be then toward less full bodied, more acidic kinds of styles like our Rieslings and our Gamay and our Cab Francs, because it's difficult for us to ripen really full bodied Cabernets and Shirazes and so on. So, if anything, that would be it. But Canadian wine as a whole is a really, really exciting place right now. It's so dynamic, it's growing. There's so many new wineries, new style, like they're experimenting. And yet at the same time, winemakers are understanding better what works here, the climate, the soil, the grapes. Yeah.
What is your favorite Canadian region right now? Do you like the wines of BC better? Do you like the
Mm.
stuff from where you are, closer to you? Do you like Nova Scotia, your hometown, your
Mm. I
homeland, right?
know. Yeah.
Nova
Like
Scotia is
picking,
getting a lot of play right now
it
for
is, isn't it? It's
it's having a
tiny, but
moment, a small moment.
it is. They make terrific sparkling wines out there, and something called Tidal Bay, which is named after the Bay of Fundy, highest tides in the world. And it goes so beautifully with steamed lobster, melted butter, sunset on the beach. Yeah, that just takes me right there. I guess because I taste far more Ontario wines of all Canadian wines. I mean, I taste wines from around the world. We have a lot of choice here. But the wines I'm most familiar with at this point are those from Ontario. And I naturally gravitate toward Pinot Noir. I know it's a cliche, but as my personal drinking wine. And we do Pinot really, really well because we're a cool climate. So I'd have to say the wines from this region, there are pockets, there are 3, almost 4 different wine regions in Ontario itself. But I'm a big fan of the Pinots that we produce here.
Of the sub-regions, where would you say the best Pinot is coming out of right now? With all due respect to everybody else, just you feel like they're the lead dog right now.
The most developed and the most advanced, the region that has the most history and understanding would be Niagara, although
Yep.
that is divided, of course, now into sub-appellations. But we've got the emerging region more northernly of Prince Edward County and some spectacular Pinots there, limestone. It's much colder up there. They have to hill the vines, like put the dirt up on the vines
Right.
at winter so they don't die. But it produces sort of these nervy, edgy wines that I love. They're kind of like people always on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Are they going to, survive? Are they going to fall apart? But when they're good, when they're on, they're spectacular. So it's that high and low, that manicness about them that I love.
You know what's really interesting to me, just going back to the Canadian system and the way that you have to buy wines? What is maddening about the system, the liquor board system, is that you're in Ontario, your access to especially French wines is great. And then you get to other places and it is horrible. And it's so much more expensive. It seems like that system is really not fair. I
Well,
mean, our systems, don't get me wrong, America's system obviously has some very serious problems too. However, I think that it's a bit more equalized. There's a lot of competition.
with our monopoly system, and even though the LCBO is the world's largest single purchaser of wine,
Wow.
yeah, they're huge, but still we have issues across the country. It's easier to ship a handgun across Canada than it is an Ontario wine to BC. We have these interprovincial borders that are insane because, as you know, Elizabeth, wine is the most value added agricultural product we produce. It has so many spin offs in terms of economic benefits and jobs. And yet we have these provincial monopolies limiting how we can buy and ship and taste our own wines across the country. It's also easier in many cases to get a California wine here than a BC wine for someone who lives in Ontario. Oh, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So the system is a hangover from prohibition for sure, where we didn't trust adults to buy alcohol. And
we still don't do that in the United States.
exactly.
Still fighting that battle.
I can only hope for change, but yeah, it's a system that needs reworking.
Yeah, and I hope
For sure.
Canada gets that soon, because one of the things that I find about Canadian wine drinkers is that they do want to know more. They love information. So
Exactly.
it's, they want to try stuff, but it makes it prohibitively expensive sometimes
Yes.
because of the monopoly system.
Well, I know when I'm teaching my online courses, I have students from Canada, the US, but also around the world. Suggesting a wine list is always a challenge. But what I try to do is say, okay, look, here are the wines that I'll be tasting, but just get a California Cabernet in your price range or in this style. So we try to overcome that. But definitely inventory issues are attached to anything you try to do when it comes to teaching or writing. Not everybody's going to have the same availability in stock. I think we've overcome that now, though, with the online courses, because if you suggest lots of substitutes, everybody ends up being able to find something, but it affects that as well.
Sometimes, but not always, because I do the same thing. And sometimes it's like people are like, I just could not find that. I could not find that, especially with some of the German, Austrian wines, things like that.
Sure.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Elizabeth Schneider. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, links to the restaurants I mentioned in Prince Edward County, as well as the Manse and Long Dog Pinot Noir, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/148. You won't want to miss next week when I continue my chat with the witty and wise Elizabeth Schneider. In the meantime, if you missed episode 32, go back and take a listen. I talk about more wine trends such as orange wines and pairings for meatless burgers. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. Orange wines are white wines that are made like red wines. Are you confused yet? They start out making a white wine. That's what they do. Their intention first is white wine, but then they leave the grape skins on during fermentation, just as red wines do, and white wines do not. This imparts a distinctive color, flavor, and texture, whereas the skins are removed to ferment white wine. Orange wine also has more exposure to oxygen, which adds a savory character called umami. So that's the fifth taste, along with sweet, salty, bitter, and sour, umami, often described as deliciousness. You get it in Parmesan cheese and cooked mushrooms, and so on. It's made from fresh white or pink vinifera or permitted hybrid grapes. All the grapes are macerated and fermented on their skins for 10 days to achieve the color of orange. 10 days. If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wine trends we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a plain old red or white wine. Go figure. You You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.